Oftentimes there's a few bumps in the road just figuring out our velocity and kind of figuring out what pace we need to move at. So I've had a chance to kind of look at your 1.2 labs and kind of reassess, like, okay, we adjust the schedule a little bit. So my plan had been to cover 1.3 today. I'm going to move that back to Tuesday to try and adjust our speed a little bit in terms of kind of where people are at and the pace that I think we need to move at right now. So today, rather than getting into 1.3, what I want to do is give you an opportunity to basically finish up your 1.2 lab. I've already gone through a round of feedback. You'll find that on Inside Ranken about what I saw in those 1.2 labs. I think large in part most people didn't have them done to the point that I wanted them to be done, right? So I'll talk a little bit about what are the things to watch for, some of the things that I want to call their attention to make sure you're paying attention to, especially as you're working through these. It can be easy sometimes to just, especially with these Codelabs, just follow instructions by instructions and forget to actually test the thing you're building as you're going, and that was largely the problem for most students, is that they didn't actually test the finished product to make sure it actually worked. And that's where you get into issues, because what your customers are going to see is the finished product. They don't see the process along the way. So if the finished project is garbage, they assume the process was also garbage. So you have to take the time to step back and test things, even things that you thought previously were working. You may have broken somewhere along the process, and that was again the case for a lot of people. Is maybe at some point it was working, but later with changes you made, you broke something important. Okay. So that's the plan for today. Is we'll go through. I want you to keep working through the 1.2 labs. That means I've extended the due date on lesson 1.2, both the lab and the homework, to the end of today. Both of those are back open. Monday, just a reminder, we have a holiday, so we won't have class here. Tuesday we'll come back and we'll do 1.3. We'll spread that over 2 days as well. So I'll do the lectures, the plan to do here, and you guys can start on the lab and have, Wednesday to finish it up. We'll get to 1.4 on Thursday, finish it up on Friday. So we'll spread both of those next two over 2 days as well. Cool. The week after that, we'll have a new set of labs that'll throw together, as well as your first test. Okay. So your first test, if you're looking, will land here on the 28th. So that's just some notes on the calendar. Okay. So in terms of the 1.2 labs, I did write out a little bit of information to just generally look at some of the things that came up. So I have shared this in the Discord. If you look there, it'll be listed as the lesson 1.2 common problems. And so I want to kind of point out some of the errors, the issues that I commonly saw. Again, a big part of this is to make sure you're testing. Another thing to be careful with is when you're creating the project, make sure you put it in the right place, in the right folder, with the right names. Okay, I have a few students who put it in the 1.1 folder instead of the 1.2 folder, and a few students that didn't call it Hello Toast, they called it something else. So be very careful with paying attention to those instructions about where you want to create the project and how, because that can be a lot harder to clean up later. And some of these projects do carry on. For instance, I know that this textbook, that Hello Toast project, is built on for a few labs, if I remember right. So do definitely make sure that it's got the right name and it's in the right place so that you're prepped for those future labs. Cool? Okay, so again, number one, make sure it's in 01.2. Make sure it's called Hello Toast. Make sure the challenge for 1.2a should be called Hello Toast Challenge. So Hello Toast and Hello Toast Challenge. Looking at the layouts, If your layout looks like the thing on the left, it's wrong. It needs to be on the like the thing on the right. Okay. So the big thing to notice on the thing about the left, you notice that there's this big white gap. That's not acceptable. That space needs to be utilized. Okay. So if your layout doesn't extend to the bottom of the screen on every device, let me be clear, that means on every device, from the Nexus 7 up to the tablet, all of those devices, this needs to be anchored to the bottom. Okay. That's something that you might have had working maybe when you did the quick straight layout. In some cases, people, when they went to the linear layout or the relative layout in 1.2b, they lost that part of the layout. Okay, so make sure, look at the portrait layout, it needs to look like that. Also make sure that you have 8 dp of margins on all sides. So you'll notice that I have 8 dp all around this, all around that, all around that, on all 4 sides. That's also something I'm looking for. Part of why those margins matter, especially around the edge, is typically that edge you don't really want to assume is a clickable region. And if you push things all the way up to the edge, sometimes you can get issues where your UI is not as usable, especially if somebody has, say, a case over their phone, because you usually lose the outer 8 or 16 dp just to a case, oftentimes. So you need to make sure you have margins there, and you'll also notice they have margins in between, between the text view and the buttons, affecting that view and buttons. So do pay attention to those little details; they do matter. Next thing, with the landscape layout, if it looks like the top, it's wrong. It needs to look like the bottom. Does everybody see what the difference is? Text is getting cut off, right? So text should be in the center, fully visible, nothing coming cut off. One thing to be wary of, the number that they told you to use for the font size there is actually the wrong number. I think a number of people use 120 SP, and I think 120 SP is in the lab. But if you actually test it with the devices, you find that it doesn't work. Namely, if you try this with the Nexus S, you're going to find that you get the ladder. And part of the biggest thing that usually throws people off is they'll test this in the designer with the system UI off. Okay, the system UI, this right here, that's enough to get you from here to there, right? If you forget to account for the out bar and the status bar at the top, that will lead you into this case. So definitely in designer, this is one of the reasons you want to have that system bar on to see how it's actually going to look. Cool. So I actually had to make that quite a bit smaller in order to fit it on the Nexus S, quite a bit smaller than 120. So check that, fix that. I've noted that on a few labs. Next up, for the tablet layout. And also I just mentioned 8 dp on all those sides, same way as the portrait lamp. On the tablet variation, if it looks like the left side, it's wrong. You see the problem? The problem immediately apparent? How usable is this UI? What's going on up here? See, the buttons are off the edge, right? They're off the edge. This is not okay, it needs to look like that. So the buttons off screen, the buttons on screen with the proper margins. Okay. Oftentimes what happens, I'm suspecting what happened for most people, is it said, oh, let's fix this so it works in landscape on the tablet. You turn it landscape, fixed it on the tablet, but forgot to turn it back portrait and see that it still works on portrait. So for a lot of students, your tablet variation works on landscape but not portrait. It needs to work on both. Okay, it needs to work on both. This is one of those things, again, when you make a change, you have to make sure to go back and retest things because you might have broken something you didn't realize you broke. Cool? So, in terms of setting this up, just a hint as to how to make this work the way it should, because it really typically should work this way, in portrait and in this way in landscape. That's really usually the desirable behavior. The way you get that, as I've noted here, is you'll want to use a horizontal chain and set their width to 0 dp. We kind of talked about 0 dp and using chains yesterday. Pay attention to that. That's the way you solve that for all screen sizes. Cool? Questions? Does that help to give you some pointers as to what to look like? So make sure you go back and take a look at how your layouts look and make sure that they look the way that I'm expecting them to be. Cool? Again, these are things that once you test them, you should see them pretty quickly, right? It's just a matter of having to go back and retest it after you finish the lab, after you finish the instructions oftentimes. All right, that's what I have. So I'll release you to finish that up.